everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discuss today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoyed this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sinoauto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Good afternoon, Lei. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon from my side. I am your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode number 90. We're closing in on triple digits.
Well, technically, we're at triple digits if we include the Max episodes, I think, right?
Well, that's correct. but we digress. So yes. The headlines, the week starting off ghoulishly because of Halloween, and we heard about BeyonCa on Sunday. And then Monday, Halloween, a series of news that I tweeted with 4 cutting prices of the Made in China Mustang Mach-E. The GAC FCA JV files for bankruptcy. Guangzhou Auto Show pretty much postponed. I'm hearing to the end of December if it's ever going to be held this year.
That's a placeholder date to me. I don't think they're going to actually have it. So,
and big news from TuSimple firing the CEO after probe, and some positive news. Geely was floating the idea of spinning off Zeekr. And speaking of Zeekr, there was that 009 MPV launch, which had actually brought in a lot of noise from competitors. Let's just say that. And we just saw the Buick Century MPV launching at the 600,000 RMB or close to $100,000.
Interior looks pretty damn good.
For a non-EV MPV, by the way.
Yes.
And October EV sales, obviously, we've already seen some of the numbers. And I think that's also the latest. You had just tweeted out the Canadian government requiring divestitures from Chinese companies in the Canadian mining companies or lithium companies. So those are the big headlines. Where do you want to start?
Let's start at the top with BeyonCa. Let me know your thoughts.
Well, first of all, the autocorrect says it should be Beyonce when you type in the name. So I hope Beyonce is not too...
The internet just needs to get BeyonCa a few million more times before it can separate the two with the algorithm. So,
yeah. And, does this world need another new automotive brand? Weiming Soh says so. So, right? So,
if one thing is for certain, Weiming Soh is a salesman because he convinced some pretty significant folks to leave their pretty stable careers and jobs to join a startup, a pretty well capitalized startup, but a startup nonetheless. And we saw the first product, which is a coupe sedan that is aimed directly at Porsche Taycan customers. So
I just call it the VW gang trying to compete with VW.
That works,
right? So from the top, I summarized that there's 7 things about BeyonCa. So number 1 is who Weiming Soh, who he is. He is the highest level Asian, or let's say Chinese even. I mean, he's Singaporean, right? But he speaks Chinese. Malaysian. He speaks Chinese, and he's the highest Asian. He was the global executive vice president of Volkswagen Group, so he's the highest.
He was on the management board.
Yeah, he's the highest Asian executive in Volkswagen. So that's number 1. Number 2 was the VW gang. right? So Christian Klinger was the former board for sales and marketing. Hans-Joachim Rothenpieler was the Audi R&D guy. The chief designer, Dirk van Brakel, was the former Bentley design and concept director. And I heard there's obviously many other people from tech, both within the auto industry and outside the auto industry. And number 3 is the strategic investors from Dongfeng and Renault.
Who he happens to be the China GM as well.
He still is. He still is,
yes.
Right? He's the CEO of Renault China.
China, yep.
Right? So, and BeyonCa is, so the company behind it is called the Beijing Binli, which sounds same as Bentley.
Bentley.
Yeah, Binli, information technology companies, with the parent company BeyonCa HK, and the largest shareholder is none other than Dongfeng Hong Kong. So that's 45%. And Renault is 15% of this parent company in HK. So this is based on.
Can you do us a quick favor, since you said Volkswagen gang? Can you let our audience know where BeyonCa's headquarters is located at?
Well, they're in the Jiangtai, if I'm correct.
Remember that old Volkswagen largest dealership in the world location in? Yes, it is right there.
Near one of the shopping malls.
Near the East Hotel.
Yes,
right?
I forgot the name of the shopping mall. But yes, I know exactly where you're talking about. And so number 3, that's the shareholders behind. This is based on Qichacha, by the way.
Yep.
The platform, Chinese platform for. And then obviously with this Dongfeng and Renault, most likely production is going to be in Wuhan, right?
Yep.
And then number 4 is basically it's starting as a global company. So they have 3 countries. So China, Germany, Singapore. They have different design centers in Munich, R&D in China, and then there's an AI center I heard in Singapore.
That's right.
And then number 5 is the benchmarking against the Taycan. So upwards of 1 million renminbi. So it's not going to be cheap, right? And then the number 6 is the car itself, the GT Opus One with the dynamic logo and the surrounding interactive system, whatever that is.
And one thing that is unique to BeyonCa is that they're really, really leaning into sensors for health monitoring inside the vehicle.
Yes, which is the number 7 point, this health as a service ecosystem that they're trying to as a selling point. And this is, I think, the only company that has hired a team of doctors.
Right.
So this kind of a smart cockpit that can monitor your health. And that, which is also the biggest question mark. Is that going to work?
So it'll work, but in the time frame that's needed, right? Because it needs to be kind of seamless and it needs to be low latency, zero latency, kind of real time. So I had the pleasure of meeting with BeyonCa in the very, 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 very early stages. And I got to talk to Weiming a couple times, work with his team on a few things. And so it's good to see the progress that they've made in a short period of time. When I spoke with them, they were working out of a WeWork just down the road from their current headquarters. And unfortunately, I'm sure both of us would be invited in to visit them if we were in China. But I plan on trying to speak with a few of those folks again to see how they're doing. We're going to see a production version of that GT Opus One at the Shanghai Auto Show, which you and I both plan on being at. So we're not going to see a high volume from this GT Opus One at almost 1 million RMB. I'll give you for instance, the Taycan in 2021 sold about 7.5 thousand in China. So we're just going to be looking at hundreds for the first several months that it's launched, and then if lucky, we get into the high hundreds and maybe 1,000 a month towards the end of 2023. And so they're going to go slow. I know they're also looking at and trying to work on a second product. So the whole Jidu thing where it's Jidu speed, we're looking at BeyonCa speed, which is highly unusual, if only because it's still driven by mostly car guys. Okay. So Weiming, to his credit, he does understand the urgency of going fast. And I think that's one of the things that he wanted to leave behind with him, or leave behind him when he left Volkswagen, is that bureaucracy and the, what's the right way to say this? The process driven decision making. Okay. Because make no bones about it, most of these decisions are coming from Weiming, the final decisions. So he has a balancing act, because I know that they also want to maintain decent relationships with the Volkswagen Group and the families that run Volkswagen Group, right? The Porsche family and the, I forget who, the Piech family, right? So it'll be interesting to see, because we'll probably see marketing material early next year that'll pit it against Taycan and likely the Hi-Fi X, right?
Yeah, so this we're seeing, by the way, BeyonCa is not the first smart EV startup, and it's not going to be the last. So that's number one. And number two, we're seeing this kind of new, because if we put these startups into buckets, right, we have the Neos and then the Xpeng's, which are started out by people that used to work in the let's say the tech or the internet industry. That's one bucket. We have the Voyas, the ArcFox, all of these that are born out from the state-owned companies. That's another bucket. And then we have the Xiaomi's, the Jidus. That's the third bucket. And then we have let's say BYD's has still yet to launch their high-end brand. That's the fourth bucket. And now BeyonCa
and NIO, their low-end brand.
Yeah, and BeyonCa now belongs to this fifth bucket, where it's a group of executives that worked at one of the largest foreign automakers in the world. And the other thing is,
let me also add that, and they have some Xiaomi employees and Alibaba employees peppered in there. So it's almost like
melting
a jambalaya, yes, of these different factions that have come together specifically for BeyonCa. But we'll start to see more of them, because Xiaomi also has a ton of ex-auto legacy folks that are working for them. So
yeah, and this is also probably a result of a kind of career ladder issue. I mean, how high can you go as someone being in Weiming's position?
I think one of the reasons he left was because he didn't get the top Volkswagen Group China job.
Yeah, right. So that's all of these issues playing out, and plus the dynamism, the market, the kind of the startup. Everybody's starting out with these new companies. So
to give a bit more background on Weiming, he was one of the more outspoken Volkswagen Group management team. And I think that's how he stood out a little bit. But he came from humble beginnings, really. He was a sales manager, I think, in Malaysia for Mercedes. And they sent him over to
Daimler Chrysler days,
start operations. Yeah. So credit to him for how he climbed. And he is known in China for starting what is now CarYad for Volkswagen Group.
Mobility Asia, yeah.
Yeah. So he, in that period of time that he worked there, I think 20 years or something like that, he was able to accomplish quite a bit. Now, he was also very polarizing, as you know, right? And, but you and I know a handful of the people that work for him, and they're loyal. They're very loyal to him, although he's very tough on them. And what sometimes might be described as a little bit indecisive, but he God bless him, because they've been able to do a lot in a short bit of time. Now, we couldn't see, touch, and feel that vehicle, but it's going to be promised by by April of next year, which is when the Shanghai Auto Show will be. So they still got a lot of work to do. And, I'd mentioned to you that I DM'd him or we chatted, Weiming, congratulations. And then he wrote me back. And so we might actually jump on the phone and chat some more. So
put him on
if
the
there's
pod.
anything, well, I'm going to ask
if he
him.
agrees to.
if there's anything that I can share, I will with the audience, because I think they have the secrets, right?
Yeah.
They kind of know all the things that the Volkswagen Group team knows.
Yeah.
And all they need to do is peel off a few hundred a month for the first few months to build that momentum, right?
So I just put this big question mark on this health selling point. I mean, they're not the first one to actually talk about this, I don't think, because we tweeted a lot about Yueting, YT on what he was doing before at Le C. They talked about health as well back in the days. So I just question, is that gonna sell? I don't know.
So to kind of not speak for Weiming, but how it was explained to me is that there are many, many old people in China and the needs of those older folks aren't being met by any car makers in the market currently. And so to me, I don't care what the feature is. I care mostly about how well it's designed. Because if it needs to be this separate thing where you're focusing on it, and remember, you're driving too. So it's not like you can do these things and then ignore driving. There will be some ADAS features, level 2, likely level 3 by 2024, but you still need to pay attention. So the integration needs to be such that you don't know it's there until you need it, right? How will it be different than an Apple Watch? How will it be different than a Garmin sports watch? Because you're in a car, you're not being an athlete, you're not running, you're not walking, trying to monitor this. So, and they have to be working with local hospitals too, right? So how that will play out will be important and interesting to find out. So,
well, I guess one of the things is the live monitoring of your health conditions, and if they sense anything is going to be wrong with you, they're going to notify you or something. That's what I'm hearing is because otherwise it'll just be what Apple is doing with this collision feature on the Apple Watch, right, on the phone,
right,
where they can automatically dial 911. Then right, so that's my big question mark.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to
TuSimple.
We can do TuSimple. So let me press 10 seconds and rewind. There were two things that came out this week: one article and one investigation acknowledgement.
I know exactly where you're going.
About the Faraday Future. There's
yes.
a Bloomberg article yesterday, and you and I scrubbed it from what you know and from what I know, and what we both know seems to have a lot of overlap, right? From what you've heard. I think that article was pretty accurate. The only thing that it didn't call out was that YT had his nephew on the management team. So,
this is about China-fornia companies. And right now, after TuSimple, after this article on Faraday Future, we have a completely new perspective on what China-fornia means. It's becoming more negative rather than positive. And TuSimple, FF, Pony, all of these companies, they're really in the same boat. And TuSimple was a ticking bomb or something, time ticking bomb or
ticking time bomb.
Ticking time bomb. It's going to be the same thing for FF and probably some of the others if they don't learn what played out in these two companies.
I do have to say that U.S. investors they sometimes plead ignorance, but you can't. if you have a few $100 million to invest and then you plead ignorance, it's a little bit disingenuous, right? Now, I didn't know about threats to this board chairwoman for Faraday Future, but I did know that I was told, anyways, that YT had basically put his shares under his nephew. And the article actually says that it's under his nephew's wife's name or something like that. We knew that YT was still pulling the strings. And, I think there's a lot of distrust, and the largest bank he doesn't have access to because he's persona non grata in China. So with TuSimple, if there wasn't a border involved with a country that is in kind of a diplomatic funk or difficult time with the United States, I don't know if this is a big story, right? Because if it was two Americans, is it worthy of securities fraud? I don't know. But again, you and I had heard stories about this as well, right? We both know Cheng Lu. He was brought in basically to get the institutionals lined up. And one notable thing about TuSimple is that they're basically the last China-fornia company right before Didi to be able to IPO, right? Cleanly is what I mean. Whereas Didi IPO'd and got crushed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that there was a huge accident in April, but we also know, and this is kind of the contradictory stuff, we also know that, or we've been told, or I've been told, that, and you tell me if you've heard differently, that TuSimple's hardware software stack was actually one of the better ones out there.
They were probably the most promising at putting these L4 trucks on the road with Navistar and DHL. But based on that LinkedIn post from Xiaodi, I feel like he might have been scapegoated based on what he said in that post. And the other thing is, I do not think he wanted to be CEO at all, or his position. Him being a tech guy, I doubt he wanted to be in the CEO position in the first place. And now he's sacked for whatever reasons that he said he did not, he wasn't aware of the wrongdoings. And then, with Faraday, it's with Carsten being at the CEO position now for the second straight company, he's going to have trouble just putting the car into production. Byton's gone, and now he's facing the same predicament.
Yeah, these guys almost are so, at least in the Faraday case, it seems that these guys are chasing fame a little bit.
Yeah, one telltale sign, in the WeChat group that were trading messages, I was looking at the press release in March when they had the Cheng Lu and Xiaodi had the transition. In that press release, Chen Mo was still the chairman, I believe, at the time. And he said, I'm going to give up my chairmanship to Xiaodi.
Right.
And less than a matter of weeks later, he started this Hydron company.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So all of these things happening are intertwined. And
there are a ton more backstories that you and I had heard, but, for the sake of just kind of keeping it to what we know, I just don't know how TuSimple gets out from under this, because it's not just SEC now, it's an FBI investigation. So there's going to be a lot of emails, there's going to be a lot of communications that are going to point fingers and imply things. And so there's a high likelihood that Xiaodi Ho will have written things, or maybe not, that incriminate him or prove his innocence. But I also think the board shouldn't be walking away very clean on this in this specific TuSimple case, because, I just find it hard to believe that they didn't know or suspect something was going on. So,
and we had talked about Argo for Ford. It was a dollars and cents issue, but it's definitely not a dollars and cents issue for TuSimple. Or right, so consecutive weeks of bad news for the AV sector.
Yeah, which
for the wrong
when
reasons.
When we're talking billions of dollars, it actually shouldn't surprise us, right? And an aside to that, Lei, is that Trevor Milton was found guilty of securities fraud.
Yeah.
Two of 3 counts, I believe. So he's likely now to face some jail time. And I think sentencing is in a few months or something like that. But it goes to show when there's a lot of money involved, people are willing to do some nasty, underhanded stuff, illegal stuff. So yeah. So we knocked out 2 birds with 1 stone. We talked about Faraday and we talked about TuSimple. What about Mustang Mach-E, and its struggling sales already, right?
Yeah, definitely not a supply chain issue for Mach-E. That I'll say.
And so 71,000 for Tesla, 217,000 for BYD. But BYD's number is a combination of PHEV and BEVs. So that's chalk, meaning that, like clockwork, we know that Tesla is going to come up with a massive number and BYD is going to come up with a massive number. NIO at 10 and change. That wasn't surprising, but Li Bin's proclamation that Q4 is going to be a massive quarter for them could be in jeopardy if they can't sort out their COVID challenges.
They just restarted, I believe.
They just restarted, yes.
After a few days of shutdown.
So the COVID challenges, I was told, started in the middle of October. So likely a week, 10 days after October holiday ended. So
yeah, so in contrast, I think NIO was actually pretty good if you compare it to XPeng.
Oh man, XPeng, dude. Man, XPeng is
4th consecutive month of drop to a third of what they delivered in June.
And they have no real rescue plan in front of them. There's no, if the G9 doesn't do well, then they're going to be struggling for likely the entire 2023, unless they can pull in a major refresh on the P5 or the P7. Because we know the G3 is way uncompetitive relative to what's out there, even at that price point.
Yeah, and the surprising was the Zeekr and Ito went up.
Yes.
In the rankings.
For one product, too.
And this domino effect from the Tesla price cut is still playing out, so kind of there's more to think. But I think generally we need to point out October, the so-called golden September, silver October, there's a bit of seasonality played into it, I think. So that's why you see month on month, it was either flat or minimal growth or fall. And also with all the the COVID situation is another wave that's starting to happen in China, right? Guangzhou, Hefei, even Beijing, in Henan with the Foxconn. That was the big news all this past week.
And it's only going to get worse, right? Especially for the manufacturers in Dongbei, because it's already started getting cold. And COVID is going to rear its ugly head in these regions where it's cold, like Heilongjiang and Jilin. And so Volkswagen could be struggling. Man, it because it is Groundhog's Day, right? With the shutdown of the Disney, and you and I are seeing our friends in Shanghai. They have lockdowns for 2 days in their apartment building, and then it's opened again. So it's whack-a-mole still, Lei. And these OEMs are not immune yet, right? And what I want to emphasize really quickly is how amazing Tesla and BYD is operationally, right? Because NIO is struggling to build 10,000 units a month. I don't care what the reason is, whether it's COVID, whether it's supply chain issues, whether it's chips, they can barely get to 10,000 a month. Tesla is at 70. BYD is at 215. So their operations teams are ninjas compared to some of these other startups, right? And again, this is veterans versus newbies, relatively newbie, right? 7-year-old company that is struggling to deal with supply chain sourcing and operations issues, right? And so I really think Tesla and BYD should be commended because they are not only maintaining their operations, but it's orders of magnitude more complex and larger than their competitors, right?
Yeah, I think one word comes to mind is momentum. So some companies are definitely having a different momentum than others. And if we benchmark against the prototypes are easy, production is hard, that famous phrase from Elon, then Tesla and BYD right now are the only two that are passing the grade.
Right.
Maybe GAC Ion, and maybe Wuling, but in terms of getting it on a consistent basis, we set these different tiers that we talk about this all the time. First, you get to the 10K. Second, you get consistently 10K on a monthly basis, consistently. Third, you get to 20K, 30K, 100K, 200K. And most of the companies are still at that first tier, right? Xpeng being the best example. Not all supply chain disruptions are what created equal, or how do I put this? So there's for some companies it's definitely supply chain issues, for others definitely not.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to pinpoint because it's just a blanket excuse now that they're using, right? Supply chain challenges, chip shortages, whatever. And having worked in operations in a past life, that stuff, and you know this, it's very near and dear to my heart. Worked a lot of hours keeping factories open. So I understand intimately what it takes and how hard people need to work in order to chase parts to make sure production is ongoing.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about was I listened to a bit of the Luminar earnings call yesterday, and some interesting comments. One word that was mentioned, execution. And I'm like, oh, they might have listened to our episode with Dr. Jun Pei, because right now it is execution phase for all these companies, Innovis, Cepton, Luminar. Luminar just started production for the Rising Auto R7.
I had to chuckle, Lei. Yeah. On LinkedIn, Luminar had posted Ni Hao.
Yeah, I saw that. Ni Hao, China or something.
Yeah.
And the way their business model, right, if you compare it to Innovis and Cepton, is completely different.
Yeah.
They're contract manufacturing in Mexico through the Celestica manufacturing partner, and they're bringing equipment from Rochester, New York, to Mexico to make this plant more automatic assembly line that's coming online next year, and then ship it to China for the R7. And that R7, the LiDAR is an optional feature. It's not standard. So the other key word they mentioned was they were really conservative about the volumes.
The take rate.
Right, the take rate. So, right. And then just, again, industrialization, manufacturing now is the hard part. And the leader of the pack is definitely Hesai. They've delivered another 10,000 LiDARs in October.
Yep. And they just launched the solid state blind spot LiDAR, right?
And I think with IBEO, filing for bankruptcy, I think we're really seeing this LiDAR space really moving from that kind of, I'm going to win this project or that project to really delivering manufacturing at capacity.
The other important aspect, Lei, is that we've already seen companies like Deep Route and Hesai really push the pricing down. So now it becomes a volume and a contract thing. And so we're going to see quickly LiDAR become standard, and it's going to push the US feature set into pulling in LiDAR as well, I think within the next 3 years on US made and sold EVs too.
Yeah, and the other interesting about Luminar is so far their wins are either with Chinese brands or with brands that are owned by Chinese companies. That's interesting.
And one of the things that needs to be pointed out is that when, again, I'd mentioned this in numerous previous China EVs and more, is that when OEMs declare their supplier for X, their supplier for Y, the other competitor OEMs normally do not want to use similar technology because it's harder to differentiate.
Right.
And so perhaps that's one of the reasons Luminar is able to do this, because Hesai and who's the other Chinese LiDAR company? Yeah, RoboSense. They're already in several Chinese brands. And so in order to zag instead of zig, Luminar is getting this opportunity. And so it's a huge opportunity for them. So God bless them and good luck to them on that.
Yeah, but unlike Septon, Luminar is really out in the front.
Yep.
Out in front for these LiDAR things, whereas Septon, I think, is a bit more low key.
Yes.
Right? That's I think that's the sense that we got.
And it's a completely different type of LiDAR too, right? I think Luminar.
Yeah.
I just had a couple of small, quick notes. Tesla is shipping about 200 employees from Shanghai Giga to get Fremont Giga increased capacity in a short period of time. So that's pretty cool. They have a team of ninjas that they send around the world.
Speaking of shipping, BYD is building ships, so they will be shipping ships pretty soon.
And speaking of shipping, Hongqi has shipped the first 100 Hongqi 5s.
They're kind of like, well, speaking of Hongqi, the Evergrande was part of that. One of the
Faraday.
Yeah, one of the names mentioned in the Faraday saga. So
we should explain this Hongqi 5 thing. So Evergrande is a real estate company. For those that aren't too knowledgeable about Chinese conglomerates, Evergrande was the largest real estate development company in China, and they had the notorious reputation of having the most debt of any company in the world. And so they were building mixed-use buildings all over China and were asking for money up front from buyers in order to fund other operations. And initially, when Evergrande entered the EV space, I thought, I don't want to speak for you, Lei, but I thought it was a land play in order to get manufacturing land and then get land next to the manufacturing so they could build more buildings. And then they wrote several checks that totaled almost $6-7 billion to buy assets and IP in order to build these electric vehicles and design these electric vehicles. And God bless them with the struggles that Evergrande real estate had. They were still able to get to job one, which, we talk about Faraday, who's been literally one of the OGs. They were around, I believe they were around before NIO, right? Faraday?
Well, 2014. So I think NIO is exactly 8 years.
Yeah.
They're founded in November 2014.
So all the same. And, we are joking around. Basically, it was you and I having a conversation on Twitter about Leeco, right?
Yeah, Leeco, yeah.
And so, yeah. Anyways, but so those were the two things that. Is there anything else? Let me see here.
And then we wanted to talk about the Canadian government thing, right?
So Corey had written that he's in some chat groups there that says that Ford is struggling with software for the Mach-E and their cameras, and there's power loss, dealership not knowing how to actually repair the car. Well, that's a global thing, I think. But so it looks and sounds like the Mach-E is not out of the woods yet from a quality and reliability standpoint. So maybe that's also a reason for the sales hitting a ceiling of a few thousand a month, because Ford is not ready to put too many of them out in the wild. So, Corey, thank you for that update.
So this is Maki, this thing you just described. This is a global thing, not China specifically.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Because Ford press release said, their SUV was number 2, the Maki was number 2. So it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, in China, it's definitely a demand issue. So that's why the price cut, right? And really in response to Tesla.
Okay, so here's another question. What do you think of softened Euro 7, which will start in 2025? Bad, good for BYD, Great Wall, etc. I'm not sure what Euro 7 means.
Euro 7?
Yeah, Cedric had written, what do you think of softened Euro 7, which will start in 2025? Cedric, if you want to explain that in more detail, happy to.
Is that the emissions? EU6, EU7?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, because I'm not sure I understand the question. That's the only thing I can think of.
So let's try to answer that question. I think, Cedric, that Tavares has lit a flame under the EU regulators. And what we're going to see is likely some sort of IRA-esque protections for the European market, where they're going to require local content in order to receive the subsidies. Because what's important to remember and keep in the back of your mind is that there is a firm end date for Europe to stop selling petrol and diesel fueled engines. And so 2035 is going to come quick upon the European legacy automakers, and they need to change their spreadsheet to figure out how they can be profitable selling just battery electric vehicles, okay, and hybrids. That's going to be challenging, but it's going to be impossible if there are dozens of Chinese EV brands, or a dozen or 2 dozen Chinese EV brands that are in the market as well. What do you think, Lei?
I think that was the other part of this was about the 2035 ban. It was Oliver Zipse putting his ACEA president hat on. He had a statement basically said that we're ready as an automaker, but we kind of need the details of the framework, the infrastructure, batteries before we can. I feel he's saying that before we can really dive into this commitment to that 2035. So it's kind of left and right. Okay, we're ready, but there could be issues at play that there will be some lobbying. That's the sense I get. So
yeah, for sure. I don't think that 2035 date is going to change. How they grandfather that in might. It might be slow, and then a steep implementation as opposed to this linear, 20, 50, 70 kind of thing. But I'm hoping that the United States government also implements it, but effectively, because of California and New York, a good part of the US is also going to be banning ICEs and or petrol and diesel fueled vehicles as well. And so, one thing that I did see on Twitter that I thought was kind of funny was an article in Fast Company about how these electric golf carts could threaten the legacies, right? And I just think, and one of the comms directors for Ford kept on bringing it back to the Maverick and how the Maverick's super affordable, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, dude, this is apples and oranges, right? Like, we're talking about city cars versus these small trucks, right? Anyways, I digress. But
yeah. So the Canadian thing, let me ask you, do you think the domino has fallen on this part of the battery equation, that you're going to see more of this divestitures required or from government?
Yes, I do. I think the pendulum is going to swing, and they're going to say no investment, or we can do this ourselves. And then they're going to find out from the OEMs what they can actually accomplish. And then they'll slowly open it back up, either to allow a certain amount of content from Because the thing is with the Canada divestitures is they specifically called out China.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like if there was another free trade partner that it was happening, they might have some consternation, but no other country was called out. It was like, you don't share the same values as we do, so you can't invest in our companies.
Lithium
right.
mining, yeah.
But Mexico didn't say that. They just nationalized their lithium mines, right? And so Ganfeng is in litigation, I think, or in a what's that called? Negotiation to figure out what the right balance is. And I know Indonesia is also nationalizing. They all just want a piece of the pie, right? They all want investment, foreign direct investment, so that they don't give the farm by selling their rare earth metals and raw materials and then get left behind with nothing, right?
Yeah, seeing this Canadian thing, we've been talking about CATL, BYD, Goshen, whoever, Eve, and the companies that were listed in this divestiture, we've never heard them.
Right.
And I think it's only the small tip of the iceberg of how much these Chinese companies dominate the entire, let's say, the upstream raw materials supply chain for batteries. And this makes me think back to our conversation with Henry Sanderson, which we should be posting that pretty soon. It's been a while, but about Canada with their mining pros, right? That they're mining country, and then how these Chinese companies are everywhere along the kind of the supply chain. And now we're seeing these companies being called out. And there's many, many more of these Zangas. One company is called Zanga. I've never heard of them. So
Fahim has written and asked, what's your take on reduced delivery time for most of NIO's models, improved production or soft demand? So what's your take on that? What do you think?
It's not demand. That's all I'm going to say.
I think that NIO has a pretty decent sized order book, and they are just operationally deficient right now, and they need to clean it up quickly.
I just hope that statement made by Li Hong about catching up with the 3 Series don't bite them, because right now that's looking a bit farther out.
Yes.
And we were all expecting, maybe they're going to do 10,000 ET5s alone in
December.
But I don't think this is going to happen. Not that fast, based on the current situation that they're confronting.
And we have to face the reality that when 2023 comes along, that momentum could stall considerably if the Chinese government doesn't maintain some of those COVID-related incentives that they put in place that are due to expire. Because what we're hearing is most analysts are saying that there's going to be a slowdown. Okay. And I can buy that. The market has been hot for 2 consecutive years. And so how severe it is remains to be seen. But if it is severe, it's going to force some of the weaker players into either wanting to get acquired, wanting to partner, or closing up shop. And so one of the players that is now on its second product after about 3.5 years is iWays, because they are.
Yeah, I was just going to say about iWays.
Yeah, they have limited capital. And you and I were trading tweets with Greg Cable. He seems to be pretty excited about it. I think it's a better product for sure than the U5, but is it going to be enough to really drive sales to where they have enough working capital that they don't need some sort of injection, because the IPO market is not going to be there for them, right?
The U6, I think, retails for 39,000 euros.
Yeah.
Which is pretty competitive, because the Atto 3 is, 38,000 euros.
And the Han is more than twice, or no, almost twice as much.
72 there, yeah.
And I don't see a 30,000 euro difference. I've sat in both cars. I've only driven the Han. I haven't driven the U6. I don't see a 30,000 euro difference. So,
but again, going back to that production issue, Highways just produced their 10,000th vehicle, and most of those 10,000 probably are somewhere in Europe, right? They haven't sold that much within China. That's
a good portion of those 10,000 are probably fleet vehicles in Southern Europe.
Yeah.
Right.
So that shows you how difficult it is to scale up.
Yeah. Well, and yes, it is where we think we got it figured out, Lei. Even you and I, who I'd like to think are two of the most knowledgeable, man, it is not easy to predict what's going to happen next, right? So
yeah, and we're hearing that Highways is being acquired.
I don't see it being acquired for $5 billion, but that's a lot. That seems like a lot for 10,000 vehicles sold, right? And with Geely also throwing out that trial balloon for Zeekr
IPO,
right?
Yeah.
You know, how much is that going to be worth, right?
Yeah, I think in Li Shufu's mind, he has several of his entities that he might want to IPO. Volvo, Polestar, right? Zeekr probably will be next. So some housekeeping. I think we're posting number 89 soon, and also our conversation with Henry Sanderson.
Yes.
Soon also, then we're pretty much caught up. And so looking forward to next week, Olaf Scholz and his entourage or delegation are right now probably somewhere over Eastern Europe on their way to China. And they will land probably in the morning, have some meetings, talk, and they'll leave right afterwards. Yeah.
It doesn't take long to kiss the ring. It doesn't take very long.
And then on Friday is the CIIE, which will see, let's say, the first China debuts of models like the Model S Plaid.
Yeah.
The Celestiq, the Cadillac Celestiq is making the China debut. The Hyundai Ioniq 6. So these this is actually a very important event because the other auto shows have not gone as intended. And then next week is also the launch of the Volvo EX90, which we can kind of compare with Polestar 3 and see, which is
yes
you're going to buy, right? So,
and the other thing too is that CIIE, if you're in Shanghai or you're traveling to Shanghai, I would that would be so mafan, I think.
Yeah, I was there in 2019, the second edition. Yeah, let's just say you needed some connections to just get in.
Yeah, I forget which one. I think I was at the 2020. No. Yeah, 2020. No.
Yeah, they've had it every year since 2018. So
yeah, so it's just weird a little bit because it's basically I don't know how to explain it.
Diplomatic.
Yeah,
more than anything else, I think.
Yeah, countries basically have booths, and so, anyways. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. And we'll get 89 out. We'll also get the Henry Sanderson one. Very important. I think he says some really, really interesting things. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
We'll talk to you next week. Thank you again.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SINO AUTOINSIGHT. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.